set aside the findings of the Seriti Commission of Inquiry into the controversial arms deal. Civic organizations Right2Know and Corruption Watch have argued that Judge Willie Seriti's 2016 findings misled the public by exonerating politicians and public servants in wrongdoing during the arms deal saga. The Right2Know says they believe the Commission was selective in choosing who would testify or present evidence. Judge President Danson Mlambo handed down the judgment a short while ago. Our reporter Ofentse Setimo is there. Let's cross to him live. Ofentse, a very good morning to you once again. What can you tell us about today's judgment?
Yes, as you've mentioned, the fact that the Commission itself actually failed to test very crucial evidence in order to come to its conclusion. So the full bench here at the North Gauteng High Court felt that certain evidence leaders were actually not asking probing questions to actually get to the bottom of what actually transpired when the acquisition of arms was made. But joining me now is Tara Davids of Right2Know, which is one of the NGOs that actually brought the matter to court to try and find people that will take the fall following the acquisition of the arms. Thank you so much for your time, Tara. What are you feeling this morning after the judgment by the full bench of the North Gauteng High Court?
So I'm from Corruption Watch and we're very excited about it. It sets a great precedent for South Africa, which obviously appoints a lot of commissions of inquiry. So we're very excited.
Yes, you guys described it as a whitewash because there was certain evidence that was in the public domain which was not entertained. How did it feel when it actually came out in court and they actually sort of sided with you guys?
Yes, it was great. We welcome the decision of the court, naturally. We've always held that it was a whitewash because the Commission failed to gather very easily accessible evidence. It failed to put into the public domain evidence that was key, and it also failed to test the veracity of witness testimony. So we've always felt it was a whitewash, and we're glad that the court made this ruling.
Yes, but the 2016 report itself had vindicated a lot of politicians and some government officials. So what is your step going forward? Because probably they would have gotten away with murder.
Well, we don't want to appoint another commission of inquiry, and it's also outside of our mandate to prosecute individuals. So we're happy with the decision at this stage. What we were hoping for is exactly what the court did, and that was to decide on whether or not it could review commissions of inquiry and then set out the principles, which are legality and rationality, against which they will test the conduct of commissions.
And why was it important for the outcomes of the commission to be reviewed if they are not really binding legally and it's just an opinion?
Well, it's important because it prevents commissions of inquiry from conducting themselves in a way that means that they don't actually conduct themselves accordingly and they don't get to the bottom of matters. So it ensures that they are held to account in terms of their statutory duty to investigate matters properly.
Okay. So is this the end of your journey or what's the next step?
Well, at this stage, we're just very excited about the ruling. So maybe we'll re-strategize, but we got exactly what we wanted. So that's it for us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Tara Davids actually saying that, they brought this matter forward, even though the outcomes of the commission were not binding, but she brought the matter here so that other commissions can try their utmost to actually uncover evidence and test witnesses the way they should, as mandated by the law. Back to studio.
Thank you so much there to Ofentse Setimo. I imagine the big question now is what next, especially because both Corruption Watch and Right2Know have stated that they have no interest in having the commission being reignited. But we spoke to him earlier today and we're joined again by Henny van Vuuren, who's talking to us via Skype. Henny, when we spoke earlier and we were talking about the way forward, it was before the judgment was announced. So I suppose we can ask again, what now?
Firstly, I think we need to take stock of a fundamental victory for civil society and for a restoration of the integrity of the judiciary in this country. The message that the court sent today was that the kind of conduct we saw under the Seriti Commission cannot be accepted in future commissions of inquiry, and very clearly said that the Commission failed to review key evidence, to call key witnesses, and in the manner in which the witnesses who were called were even questioned. So I think an incredibly important precedent that has a far greater impact beyond just this commission itself and at the arms deal itself. I think what we are going to be watching now is the appetite by the NPA and others to investigate and prosecute the arms companies and corrupt politicians who were involved in the arms deal. But it is, I think, just a moment to savor for all of us as South Africans of how democracy is at work right now.
Interesting that the conduct of commissions can now be tested. It's an appropriate time for this decision to come out when the country is undergoing several commissions and also looking at the results of commissions like the SARS Commission.
Absolutely. I think it is crucial. I think it is important because it sends a message that when those judicial officers are tasked with reviewing important facts that have had an impact on the lives of ordinary people in this country, we shouldn't forget all of these stories of corruption and state capture have led to deepening inequality, to poverty and misery for many, many millions of South Africans. And so therefore there's a responsibility from the individuals who lead these commissions, from the advocates and lawyers who work in those commissions, and particularly those who are paid for by the state to ensure that they do their jobs diligently according to the law and according to the rules of the commission. The lawyers, many of them evidence leaders in the Seriti Commission, and of course the judges, failed at this. I think their questions need to be asked why they allowed a cover-up to happen at the scale that they did allow it to take place. What were their motives for doing so? And I think one can't just say it was simply a case of not wanting to do their work or laziness. I think there are questions need to be asked about political and other motives. And ultimately, this cannot be allowed to be repeated. And so we expect of the other commissions, whether it's, as you say, into SARS, into state capture more generally, the PIC, all of them to be doing their jobs thoroughly. And I think we would hope that the heads of those commissions and their senior staff and evidence leaders read this judgment with great care, and they ensure that this helps to guide them in upholding the rule of law in their work.
Were you watching? What were your biggest takeaways in terms of the delivery of the judgment?
Well, I think it's an extraordinary judgment in the candid way in which the judge dealt with the lack of questioning of key witnesses. We think about Fana Tlongwane, of Tipi Sheikh and others, all alleged to be involved in corruption in the deal. And I think, on the one hand, one is, of course, delighted that the wrong has been corrected. But there's also a great sadness that a person who once had a very good career as a judge, Willie Seriti, had allowed this cover-up to take place, and that one of his peers have effectively suggested that the commission he led undermined the rule of law. And I think while one is very pleased for the victory, I think it's also one is saddened by the failure of the commission and what took place. But I think it's very important that it was a cool, calm, collected judgment, and one that was based on evidence and facts. And it is really the result of something that I don't think the politicians and the arms companies thought would happen. In this country, civil society organizations didn't just take the outcome of the Seriti Commission lying down. It didn't become the final word on this matter. It's taken 3 years through the courts, a huge journey and effort to get it here, and I think there was a vindication of those efforts today.
The judge president slammed Judge Seriti, saying his decisions were manifest failure, he said. Why do you think Judge Seriti went this route?
I think that's a question that, that's a serious question which now must be asked. I think that it is crucial that consideration be given to what were the motives for the manner in which he acted. I think there would be good reason for the Judicial Services Commission to perhaps consider that conduct, and certainly for the Bar Council and others to consider the conduct of the lawyers and the evidence leaders, rather, who simply didn't ask the questions of some of the key witnesses. And again, this judgment is very clear that they too failed in their conduct. those lawyers cannot simply, advocates cannot appear at a commission of inquiry, rake in millions of rands of fees and not do their job and then expect the public to subsidize them. And I and others have argued that they too need to be held to account. So I think there are going to have to be questions asked of the conduct of the senior legal officers in the Seriti Commission as to why they conducted themselves in the manner they did.
Do you think this vindicates Right2Know and Corruption Watch?
I think it's certainly a vindication of Right2Know of Corruption Watch. We shouldn't forget that before the Commission had reached its conclusion, over 40 civil society organizations joined Right2Know, Corruption Watch and others in calling for the Commission effectively to be disbanded. And in a way, it was an indication that through civil society, the public had started to lose faith in the conduct of that Commission. But the charade that's led by Judge Seriti simply continued as long as they thought they had the state funds to do so. And so today is definitely a great victory and a really important, I think it really underscores the role that civil society can and does play in upholding the rule of law and acting in the public interest in this country.
In fact, that's the next question I wanted to ask you. How does this bolster the stance of civic society going forward? Because you said the public had lost confidence in this commission, but the public had also, for a while, lost trust in the civic movement.
Well, they certainly. I mean, look, I don't think that any sector of our society is a perfect one, but we need to recognize that the forces of government and business certainly were not interested in reopening the issues around this particular arms deal. If anything, many people have simply said this needs to go away. And clearly it hasn't. And it hasn't in large part because it is civil society who have ensured that the cover-up, which many have wished and have worked tirelessly for, has not prevailed. We need to recognize, again, just to stress the importance that if the reason for these individuals and corporations wanting a cover-up is that they've made massive profit out of the arms deal, and for many of them, including former President Jacob Zuma and others, there's the very real possibility that they might go to jail for their actions. And I think, you know, the turning the tide against the cover-up, which happened today through the courts, through the efforts of civil society, helps us to ensure that the people that were involved in a crime cannot simply get away with it. And we need to start with the powerful if we want to fix the system in our country, the system of democracy.
So the very first case where this outcome might get tested is that case you spoke about earlier, the Thales and Jacob Zuma case that's currently underway at the Pietermaritzburg High Court. How do you think it will impact that case? This outcome will impact that case?
Yeah, certainly. I think that one of the defense issues of defense that President Jacob Zuma and I assume his counsel, Muzi Sekakane and others have been using is this very weak claim that they can rely on the outcome of the Seriti Commission, which found no evidence of President Jacob Zuma's involvement in corruption, nor of the French arms company Thales. Well, clearly, if one reads this judgment very carefully, we can no longer rely on the findings of the Seriti Commission. I don't think any other court would take seriously that kind of defense. And so I think what Jacob Zuma, what Thales, and the other big arms companies had hoped was that the Seriti Commission of Inquiry would give them a green card. They would be able to go and do business in other countries, always arguing that there were allegations of corruption in South Africa, but it lacked no substance, and there was a commission of inquiry that cleared them. And as of today, there is no commission of inquiry that has cleared them. All of the allegations of corruption, I think, certainly are back on the table, and now the importance is of those having a proper airing in that court in Pietermaritzburg. The importance of that trial is as much about...
All right, we seem to have lost Henny van Vieren there, but he was one of the first whistleblowers in that case. But just to get a review, a re-listen to some of the delivery of Judge President Mlambo when he gave the judgment this morning. Let's take a listen.
The findings of first respondent issued and published in a report released to the fifth respondent on 30 December 2015 and made available to the public on 21 April 2016 are hereby reviewed and set aside. Fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh respondents are ordered to pay the costs of the applicants, including the cost of 3 counsel, which were incurred until the withdrawal of the fourth to seventh respondents of their opposition to the application. I hand down the judgment.
I agree.
I agree.
We're now joined on the line by political analyst Dirk Coetzee. A very good morning to you, Coetzee. Reviewed and set aside, your initial thoughts?
Well, I think first of all, it has very many implications. It has implications for President Mbeki because he was in a very key position at the time of the acquisition of the arms deal. At the same time, it has implications for President Zuma. We know that the charges that is still at the courts at the moment are dealing with that situation. And then it has implications with some persons, like, for example, former Minister Lekota and some others who have been involved in this. So I think it opens up the situation. And at the same time, I think it is also going back to what is the role, the functions and powers of commissions of inquiry in general. And I think this court judgment is going to force the President specifically, who appoints commissions of inquiry, to relook, to revisit the concept of commissions of inquiry.
You speak about the people that will be impacted, but in the proverbial chess language, what will be the next move?
Well, that is not yet clear. I think most possibly it will be referred back to the National Public Prosecutions, the NPA, as well as the Hawks, to say that whatever has come out of the Commission, as well as those areas that are identified that have not been properly addressed, that those must be pre-investigated to see if there's available evidence or new evidence which can be used. But I think the presidency itself will have to reconsider whether it's necessary to reinstitute another commission of inquiry or therefore have another form of investigation, an alternative form of investigation. Because it looks like commissions of inquiry are not necessarily suitable for these type of investigations. And therefore, other means, the Special Investigative Unit is one possibility, the Hawks is another possibility, although the NPA is not an investigative agency, also to the extent that they can become involved in that.
So, in terms of the future and the legacy of Judge Willie Seriti, what does this do to his reputation as a credible judge?
Well, this is not about his role as a judge so much, because it's not about the court judgment. It is about the role of commissions of inquiry. And if you look at other commissions of inquiry, even the Farlam Commission, Judge Farlam, for example, complained last week that very little has been done about the follow-ups to his commission's report ultimately. I think it is more of a reflection on commissions of inquiry in general, and to what extent do they have real powers in order to not only investigate but to come to conclusions that have real tangible results. And I think that if we are now busy with 2 commissions, including the Zondo Commission, and that's something that actually applies to the Zondo Commission also. To what extent the conclusion in the end and the recommendations of the Commission is something which really has some concrete effects and is not simply the result of an investigation.
Thanks for talking to us this morning. Political analyst and Professor Dirk Coetzee.